And we know that Henry VII, who's pictured here, he used panel portraiture at his court, and he commissioned portraits of himself, his queen, Elizabeth of York, and his children, Prince Arthur, Prince Henry, who later became Henry VIII, and his daughter. And so he would have commissioned these kind of small sets of family portraits, and really to give away to foreign courts as diplomatic gifts. Also, he commissioned portraits to be used in marriage negotiations. But also, they would have kept some of these portraits at the English court, and they would have been hanging in some of the royal palaces in England. And these portraits, this portrait of Henry, it's one of the earliest known portraits that we have of Henry VII, and it was probably painted in the first decade of the 16th century in Henry's lifetime. And it's really important for the development of portrait sets, because these early paintings that were made in the English court, they were copied throughout the rest of the century, because they provided the standard portraits, the official portraits of these royal figures. So if there was a portrait owned by the king, then other people who wanted a copy of that portrait, they could maybe send a painter to copy it, or perhaps we know that portraits were traced, patterns were made from portraits, and then they could be reproduced for other people to have their own copies. So people probably began commissioning copies of these early royal portraits in the early 16th century. I just want to mention these portraits up here of, this one is Edward IV, and this is Richard III. And these portraits are really significant to the development of portrait sets, because they're posthumous portraits. They were painted probably between 1510 and 1530, which is after these kings, these 15th century kings, had died. And they're probably based on portraits that were first painted during their lifetimes. But the fact they were painted posthumously tells us that there was a market starting to emerge in the early 16th century for historical portraits of English kings and queens. People didn't just want a portrait of the reigning monarch, they also wanted a portrait of past monarchs. And these two portraits, we know that they were made as a pair, apart from the obvious stylistic similarities. Some technical research has been done on these paintings, and they've been found to have been painted on wood that came from the same tree. So we know they must have been painted at the same time and probably in the same workshop. And they were meant to be seen as a pair because people were meant to look at these portraits and to think about the stories that they knew about English history from the 15th century and about the Wars of the Roses and the stories about Richard III murdering Edward IV, his brother's sons in the Tower, because these were the stories that were circulating in the 16th century. Around the time that these portraits were painted, Sir Thomas More was writing a history of Richard III. People were really interested in this history of the nation. And when Henry VII came to the throne, it was believed that by becoming king and by marrying Elizabeth of York, Henry VII was bringing an end to these internal conflicts of the 15th century, bringing an end to the Wars of the Roses. And this is why Henry VII is depicted with a red rose, because he came from the House of Lancaster. And this probably would have been displayed with the portrait of his wife, Elizabeth of York, and she would have held a white rose. But it shows us that people are interested in using portraiture to tell stories about history.